outline they outline what's expected behavior and acceptable behavior in society. And so we learned that one way to measure the type of economic system is to look at the economic institutions within that country. And so those economic institutions can be anything that establishes behavior, practices, and patterns upon which the community is built. And the major institutions that we're going to focus on are open competitive markets. Are those are is the society, do they have open competitive markets? Are people free to trade with one another, not just in their own country but even with people in other countries? Do the people have property rights? That's an institution where you get to own, even your labor, for example, is your property, and you get to decide what you want to do with that, who you want to sell your labor to. But even your possessions, they belong to you. And then, is there rule of law? Will that rule of law, will it protect your property rights from, force by other people? And that rule of law, is it applied universally to everybody, even the people who make the laws? And then, is there a system of incentives that encourage entrepreneurship and innovation? I really liked, I don't know who was saying it, somebody commented on, we thought that the country, maybe a country that had more people, would likely have better politicians and more entrepreneurs. And one thing about we do see certain countries where there is more entrepreneurship, but I don't actually, this is from my opinion corner, I don't think that it's something that is genetic or that is part of, that it's just people that might be born here are more entrepreneurial than people that are born there. It's the institutions around them that they grow up in, or that they are a part of, or that they move to, that encourage entrepreneurship. And so among any population of people, you can have amazing human ingenuity, but where that can be turned into innovation, and entrepreneurship, depends on the economic system where people live. And a lot of people will leave one country and go to another because entrepreneurship is, encouraged, and they can profit off of that, and they can be rewarded for that. Okay, so entrepreneurship can't exist without open markets and property rights and rule of law. Those are very important. Okay, so if you were doing this activity in the class, you would ask for 21 volunteers, and for some of you, excuse me, that might be the whole class. Or if it's close to the whole class, you may want to add in a few countries. If you have 24, then rather than just have 3 people sit there, you might add in some extra countries. Or if you only have 18 students in class, you could pull out 3 countries. But we're going to have 21, I'm going to ask for 21 volunteers. And instead, what I'm going to do with you guys is I'm actually going to put you into groups. But what you would do is you would give each of the students of the 21 volunteers, you would give them a sign that has a country name. And the lesson plan has it pre-printed so you can print them all out and just print out the country names. In this case, I'm going to send you to rooms. Let me grab the link here. Okay, I think it's coming up on the next one. And you're going to, as a group, you're going to line these countries up in order of economic freedom. So Jamie introduced this idea of economic freedom. And for more economic freedom, this is where the definitions, that when economists talk about capitalism and socialism, we mean something very different than what have become the societal definitions of those things. And Jamie talked about, the way economists define them. But I think it's important to note that the way society defines them and the way your students will think about them is often very different. Like when people think about capitalism, they often think about big business, being very powerful and getting special favors from government, and, not a lot of competition. For example, like you think about companies like things that we don't like about, like it makes us nervous if Amazon doesn't have a lot of competition, or if Walmart doesn't have a lot of competition. In fact, if they didn't have competition, that would be the opposite of markets. We like open competitive markets. Capitalism would be when there's lots of producers, not when it gets concentrated to just a few producers in a market. Likewise, when students think of capitalism today, they look at, they think about really powerful, wealthy people being able to gain at the expense of others. That's not capitalism either. Being able to take from people, and kind of redistribute in that way that, this getting wealthy off of taking advantage of people. That's not capitalism. That means we're not protecting people's property rights. And so what often I think is a better definition of when people think of capitalism today, what they're really thinking of is crony capitalism. Big business in bed with big government, and people using government to get special favors that benefit them. And that's not what economists think of as capitalism at all, unfortunately. But it makes those terms kind of useless then when we talk about them, because when I say capitalism, my students are thinking about the crony kind of capitalism, and that's like the opposite of capitalism, opposite of what we want. Well, what we're really talking about is having open competitive markets, rule of law, property rights, and entrepreneurship. So we focus on that institutional definition of capitalism. So you're going to line these countries up in order of economic freedom. And let me go ahead and give you the link. I think I have it up here. Let's do, nope. Give me 1 second. Yeah, line it up in economic freedom. Okay, so I'm going to share. I apologize. This is something new. I used Bitly to create a short URL. And when I opened it today, I noticed a new thing happened. Let me make sure this goes to everybody. Okay, so go ahead and look in the Zoom chat. You'll find a link, click on it. If it happens to you like it did to me, it took me to like a little Bitly commercial for like 7 seconds. And then it went to the page. So when you get there, just give it a second. And eventually it's gonna load some slides that look like the one you see on my screen, okay? Now don't do anything yet. When I send you into breakout rooms, if you're sent to breakout room 1, you're going to go to slide 1. When you go to the slides, it's going to drop everybody onto slide 1. But you're going to move to the slide that matches your breakout room, okay? And then as a team, you're going to move those countries around on that, spectrum. It's okay to stack them a little of where you think they belong, more economic freedom or less economic freedom. So I'm going to go ahead and shuffle the breakout rooms. And let me see if I have to move anybody. 1, 2, 3. Okay, this looks good. So you're going to work with different people than you worked with before. And you're going to move to the slide that matches your breakout room number. And it'll be a new breakout room number, most likely. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to send you away. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm on the team slides, and I'm going to just flip through them. You have everybody back? Make sure everybody's back. Oh, no, we still have some people not back. All right. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So in the classroom, your students with signs would have shuffled around until they felt like they were in a good order. And I'm just going to flip through our slides so you can notice what the different groups have done. This was team 1. You can see where they've placed things. They're still shifting a little bit. And here is team 2. Team 2, there we go. There's team 2. We have China right in the middle, I noticed. Quite a few over on free and some over on not so free. Spain's getting bumped around in some different places. So less free on this one, more free, very free on this one. This is team 4's layout. Venezuela has been definitely to the left on everybody's scales so far. Here's Mexico. This one has Mexico is very economically free. This one has Mexico a little farther to the left, but still relatively free. I saw some of the names got flipped over, like Morocco here on some slides. It's tricky moving them around. Okay, here's group 7. They have a bunch tied for most free. Kind of like how you got them in quarters there. This one's a little more spread out. Cambodia shows up there as not very free. Mexico's jumping around quite a bit, so we'll have to see where they fall. And then this is group 9, and here's group 10. All right, so let's see how your results compare. I'm going to go back to our main slides here. And this is from the 2023 Economic Freedom of the World report. And I think the 24 report the 24 report is out, but the data in the report is always 2 years behind. And so so this shows 2021, but that was the data used for the Freedom of the World report for 2023. And the Economic Freedom of the World Index, that report is put out annually. It's published by the Fraser Institute, but there are the main economist, is he at Southern Methodist University, Jamie? Bob
Lawson. He's at SMU. Southern Methodist.
Southern Methodist University. Bob Lawson, and he has some economists that work with him, but then he works with other economists and people around the world, a lot of think tanks who help contribute, from their countries. And so here what you can see is their economic freedom score on a scale of 1 to 10. So you can see Singapore is up there at 8.5, Venezuela is down at 3.01. And then their rank, where they are out of 165 countries. And then on the right, which quartile are they in? 1 would be the most free, 2 would be free, 3 would be not so free, and 4 would be unfree, very unfree. And so Mexico was one that jumped around a lot. But on this list, you can see that they are ranked 68 out of 165 countries. Their score is 7 out of 10, and they're in the second quartile of economic freedom. So any other surprises you have here when you're looking at this list compared to your predictions?
I was just surprised so many groups had Mexico so far over to the right, because there are generally major rule of law issues there with property rights.
They're right next door to us, and it's always an interesting case study, but they're also a country that is, when you look at the kind of average GDP per capita of the world, they're right about the middle. It's kind of like a good median indicator. And I live in Arizona, we're very close to Mexico. That's really helpful for my students to understand that about half the people in the world enjoy a standard of living higher than that of Mexico, and half have a standard of living lower than that of Mexico. Anybody else?
I thought Singapore was a little bit restricted, because I've heard that they have very strict rules to abide. That's why the streets are clean and all that.
Yeah. Singapore is a country that comes up in our socialism unit that we study, because people often do think of Singapore as being maybe tending to be more socialist. They do have some very strict rules. And so when we get to Singapore, we can see where they score high and where they score low. Some years, like in this year, they ranked number 1. Sometimes they're a little bit lower. So they do score, they do have open competitive markets, but there are some areas where the personal individual freedoms are not as great. Like you're kind of forced, you have to contribute to this social insurance program. But it's more privatized than like Social Security that we have here. It's also in much better financial state, right? But Singapore is an interesting case study. Any other things that surprised you?
Yes, our group 6, we were questioning Belize because one of the group members brought up the fact that there are sort of many commercials, compelling people or luring people into retirement there, which made me think that they may have had a more robust, economic situation.
Yeah.
So I was a little surprised to see that they were sort of down on the scale.
Yeah. Well, if you're wealthy in a country like the United States and you move to a country like Belize, your wealth will go a long way, right? And maybe that's an indicator, as you mentioned, that maybe economic freedom is getting better in Belize. Maybe property rights are more protected. We'll have to look at that. So take a picture of Belize. Their score is 5.91 and their rank is 126. And we'll compare that when we go to the site to see in the latest report if they've improved at all. All right, now what I'm going to ask you to do is to line those same countries up in order, but this time I want you to line them up in order of real GDP per capita. So not economic freedom, but how wealthy do you think the countries are, per person? Okay, so let me give you the link again. Copy the link address. I'm putting it in the chat. Open the chat again. All right, go ahead and go to that link in the chat so everybody's there. And you're going to go back to the same breakout rooms that you were in before. And you'll see the same countries, but this time you're lining them up per country. Okay, here, I'll give you 3 minutes or so to do this. On your marks, get set, go. Debbie Davis, are you counting Alex's cat as a participant today? He's been paying attention.
Maybe I should.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So are there any, I'm just going to flip through the slides real quick so you can get a chance. This is group 1. Here's group 2. Notice if it looks like yours or different from yours. Here's group 3. Now everybody has Mexico right in the middle. Here's group 4. Here's group 5, 6, 7. I forgot to mention that the Republic of Korea was South Korea. North Korea doesn't share their information very freely. And so it's hard to include North Korea in these kind of rankings and scores because it's often estimates and stuff. There are places that try to estimate North Korea's GDP per capita, but it's tough to get access to that information. And here's group 10, or group 8. What happened to group 9? And there's group 10. Okay, so tell me from your experience or in your group, were there any countries that maybe you ranked high GDP, but they had lower freedom, economic freedom? Or vice versa. Maybe you thought that they were an economically free country, but now you've moved them, they have lower GDP per capita. Any countries like that stand out?
China.
China? So where did you guys put China for freedom, and where did you put them for per capita GDP?
They were low in both.
Okay, so you didn't change. They were similar in both. Okay, where else? Anybody else see a difference? You made a change. They didn't correlate necessarily. Okay, how about the opposite question? Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
I think Mexico would go down the ladder on low GDP and economic freedom.
Okay.
I was thinking the same for Jamaica.
That they were more free, but poorer.
Yes.
Okay. Any others? Okay. It looks like, I'm just looking at, as we flip through the slides, it looks like there seems to be a correlation between what you thought per capita GDP was and economic freedom. Let's go back to our presentation slides. Oh, okay. We already talked about GDP and GDP per capita earlier today. So here is a list of real GDP per capita. And whoops, I forgot to look from the lesson, but Jamie, I don't know if you remember off the top of your head, which resource this is, real GDP per capita? Was it like IMF, or do you remember? Okay, she probably stepped away. But in the lesson, it references which list this comes from. But if you Google real GDP per capita by country, One resource you can go to is the Wikipedia source, and it lists actually several different rankings of GDP and how they measure it. And one that comes to mind that's listed there or included there is the International Monetary Fund. I think the World Bank has their own measure, but it puts like 3 different measures right next to each other. So you can see where countries fall on those different measures. And some of you have referenced using these kind of numbers in like your geography class or your economics class. And so if it's a little different than what you've seen, it could be because we're looking at different measures. But here you can see that of the countries on the list, Singapore actually comes out as having the highest per capita GDP. Singapore after that, with Cambodia actually being down here at the bottom. Where's China? China's, up right next to Mexico. And Venezuela, the best number that we have or the measure is back from 2014. It's been really hard to get good data from Venezuela since the hyperinflation. Jamie, now that you're back, do you remember which number or where these per capita GDP, if it was I forgot to check the lesson before I started. Was it the International Monetary Fund? Was it the World Bank? Which measure of real GDP per capita?
Let me just double check before I say something.
Okay, you can even just put it in the chat when you find it. Okay, so here we have all of this information put together. So you can see their economic freedom score, their rank by economic freedom, which quartile they were, and now the per capita GDP. And so you can see that there are some countries that stand out, like Venezuela had a higher per capita GDP, but very low economic freedom. Sudan was low on both, low economic freedom and low per capita GDP. China, lower on per capita GDP, but higher on income. Look how much higher they are than some of these other countries down here at the bottom. But if you look at all the ones that are scored in the top quartile of most economic freedom, those are also countries that have the highest per capita GDPs. And generally, these countries down here with the lowest economic freedom have relatively low per capita GDPs. Any questions or observations or things you want to point out or call attention to?
Yeah, what is the criteria for selecting these countries? Because I'm seeing Japan, France, England, Germany, those countries are all missing. So it's there,
Yeah.
but then it says rank 165 countries. So how?
So this was just a selection. We just took a sample of some countries that were in quartile 1, some that were in 2, some that were in 3, and some that were in 4. And so it just gives us a look, but it's definitely not the complete list. We are going to go to where we can see the complete list though. And so here's the link. If you scan the QR code that you see on my slide, it'll take you there. I will also just open up another little window here. Should have had this one up. You can go to freetheworld.org. And it takes you to the Economic Freedom of the World map. This is there's a report that goes along with this. So up at the top, you can click on research and you can actually open the publication. But we can look at the map. You could get the spreadsheet, the data set from all the information. But the map is very interesting because you can scroll around to the different countries and see what their rank is, their score. So you mentioned Germany was missing. I can scroll over to Germany here and see that they're ranked 16 with a score of 7.8. And Japan is ranked 11 with a score of 7.9. Who else is over here that South Korea was on the list, but you'll notice North Korea is gray because we can't include them in the index because we don't have good data. Susan, you had a question?
Oh, yes. I was just curious. I've been using GNI versus GDP, and I understand what's different about them, but are they essentially consistent throughout? Like if you saw the top 10 GNI countries, are they pretty much the same as the top 10 GDP?
At first I thought you were saying that like the Gini coefficient, but you're saying GNI, like gross national income. Those are relatively close.
Okay.
In economics, we usually use GDP. GDP is just per capita is more common than GNI, but they're similar. You should see a similar comparison or correlation. So also, I just want you to take a look at the colors. So everything that you see that is blue is most free, or that teal color. Everything that's green is in the second quartile, and everything, the third quartile is the, second to last as far in freedom. And then red would be the least free countries. So just take a snapshot, kind of remember those for a minute. And I'm going to show you another map. This is a map from the International Monetary Fund that shows, here we're looking at GDP per capita. Is that right? Yeah, so this map here, one up here, this is economic freedom. And this one is GDP per capita. Okay, I'm just going to flip back and forth between the two. And what do you notice?
Looks like
Any
correlation.
observations? What kind of a correlation?
Freedom equals prosperity.
The more economic freedom, generally the higher the GDP per capita, or the more wealth per person in that country. So now we're going to look at the United States. And so for this one, let's see. I want everybody to open up this website, the freetheworld.org website. So go ahead and open that up. I'll put the link in the chat. Copy the link. And Christian pointed out sometimes the 1% hold the wealth in free countries. And that is when I first thought Susan was asking about the Gini coefficient. That's a measure of how the wealth is distributed in a country. And we don't see a correlation with that. So you can be a very wealthy country with a very inequitable distribution of income, or you can be a wealthy country with a more equitable distribution of income. That one's kind of all over the board. But it is important to remember that GDP per capita is just an average. It does not measure how equitable it's distributed. And James, check out JD's link in the chat as well. Okay, so you're going to go to this website, the Fraser Institute website, the Freedom of the World map. And with that 2-year lag, what they do is there are 26 components to the index, and each component and subcomponent is placed on a scale of 0 to 10, and that's what comprises this overall score of 1 to 10. And so I'm going to have you collaborate with your team, and on that map you can highlight over a country, you can click on that country, and you can actually see how they score in each of these categories. So you're going to tell us what's their world rank, how do they score as far as the size of government, legal systems and property rights, sound money, freedom to trade internationally, and regulation. How do they score in each of those categories? So again, I'm going to have you open up the shared team slide here. Let me get to too many things open. Back to the chat. Okay, so go back to the Zoom chat and open up this link. It'll take you to these team slides that look like this. It's going to drop everybody onto the same slide, onto slide 1, but you're going to move to the slide that's for your group. Okay, I'm going to send you back to the same group, and you're going to find the United States and put their score on there for each of those categories. All right, mark, set, go. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I pulled up Belize real quick because we wanted to see if they have moved up. And in fact, their score has gone up from, it was 5 point something to now 6 in the most recent report. So things are getting better as far as economic freedom is concerned in Belize. Okay, so you looked up just for the United States how we scored. Where do we score the lowest? Somebody just call it out. Or you can put it in the chat.
Government size.
Size of government. So what does that mean? And now when you're doing this with students, you could have everybody do one country, You could do it together. You could give everybody a different country to check out. But when they're measuring size of government, they're measuring the degree to which a country relies on personal choice and markets rather than government budgets and political decision making. And so the larger the government is as part of that economy, the more decisions that are taken out of private individuals' hands and are answered by public officials and things. A legal system and property rights measures how consistent the legal system is with the rule of law, security of property rights, an unbiased judiciary that's independent, and impartial and effective enforcement of the law. So there could be laws, but if they're not enforced, it's like having no laws in the first place. Sound money. So does the country have a currency that's free from rapid inflation? Like Venezuela would score very low for sound money. Because when you have, when you don't have sound money, it makes it really hard for people to invest in businesses or to invest in anything in the economy. Is there freedom to trade internationally? So can they trade in markets, but also with people in other countries? And so are there like tariffs? Are there a lot of tariffs and quotas? I'm sure the next report, the one that'll be put out in 2027, our score for freedom to trade internationally will go down based on what's happening in 2025 with tariffs. Are there hidden administrative restraints, controls on exchange rates and the movement of capital, investment funds, across borders? And then regulation, that can be, how burdensome is the regulatory system? So those are the things that they're measuring. And there's in the report, you can read even more details on how they go about measuring those things. There's subcomponents of each of those categories. But remember back to the institutions that Jamie introduced, that we associate with capitalism are open markets, property rights, rule of law, and entrepreneurship. And so there's one more activity you could have your students do together in groups is have them look at these categories in the index and talk about which one of these best fits or helps address these institutions. So like open markets, for example, freedom to trade internationally would be something of an indication of how open the markets are. Property rights, where would we find evidence of that? Probably in the second one, the legal system and property rights, right? And so you're just matching there, and there can be more than one. Each of these indexes in the category could support more than one of these institutions. So economic freedom is the freedom of choice that individuals enjoy in acquiring and using economic goods and resources. The underlying assumption of those who favor economic freedom is that individuals know their own needs and desires best, and that self-directed life guided by one's own philosophies and priorities rather than those of a government, you're the one that best knows that, as opposed to somebody else knowing that for you. So then you could just, to reinforce, you could ask your students these assessment questions. So that's yes.
I was looking for my raise hand thing. I couldn't find it. I think this number's okay. Rank 43 for size of government, but then 4 in regulations. Wouldn't size of government and regulations kind of be similar?
There's definitely a correlation, but size of government is often one of the measures or things they look at is how big is the government sector of the economy. So of GDP, how much of that is G, we measure government, how much of the spending in the economy happens by government, as opposed to private individuals, businesses, the rest of the world with international trade.
Yeah, that's kind of scary, 43. I think people will have more.
Yeah, but there are, as much regulation as we often think we have, you'd be surprised how it can be even more burdensome in other countries. There used to be a great resource called the Freedom of Doing Business Index. They stopped doing it about 5 years ago, but it was, that it tried to measure just that thing, like how easy is it for somebody to just go start up a business? And in some countries, the regulatory process was so burdensome that it was almost impossible for people just to start a business, even if you had, the money and the resources.